Good day, all. Welcome to the Powerhouse Perspective, empowering leaders for business breakthroughs. Thank you for joining us. I'm Scott Medeiros, the president of HelmWise, and this is Chandler Rose, the CEO of the Rosewood family of companies. And often when we put our podcast together, we put some notes together and have an outline, and we work our way through a particular topic. But today, we're going to freelance a little bit, or freestyle. And Chandler, I think you have a topic that you would like to discuss today, and we'll take that down and see where it leads us as well as our listeners.
Yeah, maybe a little more controversial, but we're going to talk religion or beliefs in business and where they belong, and then how they play out for us, why they're important to a leader. And coming off of Easter, I'm a member of C12, Christian Business Leaders. We have a big event down in Texas where about 2,000 business owners will be later this week, and I'll go down to that. We, of course, had a conclave where we brought leaders together, and topics of Christianity specifically come up there. It's not meant just for Christian, leaders to come. It's open to anyone, including those that don't have, any religious belief. Certainly ones that are different than ours. But how does that play in? And then, of course, you being Catholic, the Pope passed away this morning.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, day after Easter, and he did the Easter stuff yesterday, and so we cover a little bit about death, but religion and business, it comes up for us often. It doesn't come up in the secular world very often, and it's interesting. I brought my little chat GPT readout. So if you go to AI and ask for the characteristics of a great business leader, they'll give you all the ones that Scott can recite off the top of his head, kind of top 10s of communication, vision, adaptability, resilience, integrity, all those things.
Accountability.
Yeah. And then, I asked AI why they don't talk about what their actual belief system is. Like, what are all those? So why would you say they have integrity, or why do you say they, are reliable, or things like that? What is it rooted in? And again, we'll get into the nuance, but it's interesting. Here's the answer from ChatGPT. They're pointing to something many leadership models, especially secular and institutional environments, have historically underemphasized, and that's the inner self. Faith, worldview, deeply held convictions are central to understanding a leader's character, moral compass, and ultimate decision-making framework. And so it's interesting to me, and I think one of my kind of thesis of our HelmWise cohort is you don't have to share our beliefs, but if you don't root your values in something we've talked about on here, that establish those as a kind of external gauge that others can hold you accountable to. And if those values aren't rooted in deeper, something more deep or sincerely held, if that's Christianity for us, that's fine. If it's Hindu, Muslim, I can pretty easily understand people who root it into greed, oddly enough. If they are truly, their main focus and what their purpose is to maximize returns and make money, it's fairly easy to establish their values and see where they're potentially going to break or bend. And I have a little bit more trouble for sure for those who are not willing to make a stand on anything as a leader. And so it's the classic, if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything.
Sure.
And so, Scott, we've had a lot of discussions at cohorts and different events, and you and I on the role of, we'll use Christianity more often on this discussion because that's where we come from, but the role of beliefs in establishing yourself as a leader and leading a team, where that bleeds over and where that can interfere with leading people that do not have your same belief system or have none. And so it's an interesting topic. I thought in the context of time, I would throw it out. And like Scott said, I gave him this heads up about 25 minutes ago through a text. So he's ready to go. He's prepared for the discussion.
So what's that old adage? The two things you shouldn't talk about are politics and religion. So we're going to talk about one of those today.
Yeah, it's, and I'll start with, again, the next ChatGPT gave me a long list of why core beliefs, must be considered. It argued after refusing to talk about them at all when it gives you its regular answer.
Sure.
And it says a leader's actions flow from beliefs, consciously or not.
Yeah.
Whether grounded in formal religion, moral philosophy, or personal code, all of which give us at least a way to transact and understand them, those beliefs determine what a leader considers right or wrong, what they're willing to sacrifice for, and how they define success, loyalty, courage, and service. Ignoring belief systems is like assessing architecture without considering the foundation.
Yeah, exactly. And we first started talking about this when it became part of the Rosewood family of companies. And I've said on this podcast many times, one of the things that drew me to the Rosewood family of companies were its values. And then you have to say, well, what is it about the values that drew me to that? And it was the fact that the organization, the Rosewood family companies, were confident enough to put their values out there. And not only that, but then hold each other to account to live those values. And so where did those values come from? Well, they came from obviously a little bit of your Christian background, but in general, every organization needs to have some foundational principle. As you just talked about, you can't build upon a foundation that is unsteady or unstable. And even when I think about going into the Marine Corps, right, I chose to join the Marine Corps. And why? Well, it was because of the standards that they had put out there back in the day, back in the early 70s. They had, we didn't promise you a rose garden, or the few, the proud, the Marines. And it was all this ethos of warfighting. And I chose to join that particular organization because of what they were putting out there. And I think as businesses, as organizations, as ships, as we call them within the Helmwise metaphor, you've got to know what the ship stands for, right? You've got to know what the captain stands for. You got to know why that ship, what principles that ship was built upon. And quite often we will put that out there, but we're putting it out there to try to draw everyone in, right? And we're afraid at times, perhaps, or reluctant at times to put things out there that we think is going to alienate any particular group. When in reality, the most important thing to be credible is to be authentic. And to be authentic, you must be aligned with your values. And so whatever those values are, state them. And will that potentially alienate a small percentage of the population? It may. But then they too have a choice to do business with you or not to do business with you. And I think we all have to understand that stating a belief system is now putting the decision back on the consumer to have a choice of whether or not they want to do business with that leader or that company, instead of saying, well, the company should adjust to me. That's a very egocentric, very self-centered view of the world when you say everyone has to adapt to me, when you have to understand that you have a choice. Now, it may not be the choice you want, but it is a choice. And I think if we were to take a more fundamental stand, people can make better choices. I think businesses and customers will be better aligned, and we would perhaps get away from some of this controversy that we live in today.
Yeah, I think we throw around the word hypocrisy a lot to tear down people's value systems and their belief systems. And I think that is a weaponized term for sure, because it assumes perfection and being able to attain values that are aspirational. If you took that standard to people's causes, like let's say solving world hunger or peace or those type things, would we tear those down as well? Because they're not really a possibility, but they're
Right.
noble and worthy of continuing to pursue it. And obviously you have the other camp. So you got the camp that throws rocks because it's, they call it everything hypocrisy that falls short. And then of course you have the camp that uses their values and their beliefs as a marketing tool or as a weapon against their own employees or people that don't believe the same as them. And so
Yes.
let's take hypocrisy maybe first. And
Okay.
kind of my opinion, I think, on that. But we judge more on how often you recalibrate, get back in line with your values, and try to do better and prevent the problem in the past. I think that's a much more accurate judgment of someone and their ability to live up to their values. If your standard is perfection and never coming short, that's a silly way to view standards. And it wouldn't work in business or personal life. And it doesn't work in business if you think of processes. If the process failed twice, let's just throw it out. No, that's insanity. So talk a little bit on your thoughts of, you've obviously done giant business, you've worked with a ton of business leaders, but, is the standard anything short of that as hypocrisy, or is the hypocrisy if you don't correct when someone points out you fall short? I think
Sure.
the second is the latter is more accurate.
Well, I think the latter is more accurate, but I would also say that many large corporations, and maybe it goes down to medium enterprises and small businesses as well, right? They want to put this absolute out there, that this is it, where this is what we stand for. We're never going to vary from that particular standard. Well, we're all human. We all make mistakes. Things come up. Situations that we didn't anticipate cause us to make decisions differently. It'd be great if we could predict the future and say this is where the path we're going to be on, and it's not going to ever be altered in any way, shape, or fashion by life. But unfortunately, life happens. And I think it's more important to adjust and to freely admit and be honest and open when the fact that, look, I had a value of X, I haven't been living that value, therefore I'm going to correct and get back online, which in reality is a biblical principle, right? You sinned, and now you're going to get yourself back on the path of righteousness. And I think that's where businesses tend to become inhuman, because we all do it, right? And if you're, again, going back to being authentic, if you are honest with people and say, look, we had this value and we skewed from it, I think people will be more respecting of that. And they're going, wait a minute, they're just like me. I make mistakes. I said that I wasn't going to, eat that pint of ice cream every single night, and yet here I am 2 weeks later doing it. If that were the case, we'd all keep our New Year's resolutions. Everything would be in a perfect world, but that's not how the world works. So why would we present a business that is different than what life is like? Now, at the same time, you can't be apologizing for not living your value every single day. That is not acceptable either. However, I do think that there is this commitment to the value, and you're holding yourself to account to it. You're holding others to account to it, and others are holding you to account to it. But if you step off in the wrong direction, recorrect. We call it orient, align, and reckon as part of HelmWise. You got to constantly do that. And so, no, I would be very leery of an organization who says that we are 100% aligned with these values and we never step one step off of the path. That to me is a bit unrealistic.
Yeah, there's a few things there. I mean, I guess I'll start with going a little bit deeper. So what are the values rooted in? So even if we establish a great, set, and the values are great, and they move you emotionally, and they move you to action, and they can inspire you to do and lead better and work with one another better. One of the questions I've had quite often with secular, business, religious, whoever it is, what are they actually rooted in? And what I mean by that is, again, number 2 on the chat GPT, characters rooted in conviction. You can't meaningfully evaluate a leader's character without examining their core convictions. And those are often explicitly shaped by religious tradition, philosophical ethics, spiritual practices. And again, we have ideas of conscious capitalism. We have the Koch brothers marketplace, or is it marketplace? Business or management.
Yes.
What is the name of it?
Market-based management.
There you go. Thank you.
MBM.
So they have a system, and it's rooted in a ultimate belief, and it kind of drives their values. And what I'm getting at is if we don't have enough communication, doesn't matter if we don't have the same beliefs, but we don't have enough to understand what the beliefs are based in, how do you prevent them from changing and getting redefined whenever it suits the leader or the leadership team? And so when I ask that question, it's odd to me that people get nervous because we've somehow separated belief systems from supposed leadership. But if you tell me you have these values, I believe in honesty. Well, why?
Correct. Well, it sounds good. It's good marketing.
Why? Yeah. And so, I'll give
That's what I'm supposed to say.
I would take a secular business answer of, I believe that if we honestly transact overall, all parties will have, as Jim calls, an omni-win. And in the long haul, we'll make more money. Therefore, I'm a capitalist. I don't have a religious belief, but that's the system that I operate in. Then now I know the parameters of honesty and why I can call Scott or another leader out on that. If it is because it's part of their religion, then I have a pretty good frame of reference. I can do some exploration on what they rooted their definition in and the limits of that kind of definition. But it's odd to me. I've had several discussions, almost debates on programs that are being funded on leadership and character, and I keep asking them what the definition of good is. And they keep refusing the answer. And I find that odd. I think you can find a definition of what's good. And I think that if you don't rally around one that's rooted in something outside of yourself, you're asking for big trouble, because then it's just relativism and I'll just redefine it when it suits me. And again, there's plenty of people who abuse this on the leadership side, plenty of people running around that claim to have Christian beliefs or whatever beliefs they have, and they use that as a facade and a ruse, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
But what are your thoughts on challenging people's underlying belief that caused them to establish the values?
Well, yes, I think it needs to be rooted in something, right? Otherwise, you're just swaying with the wind. Whatever
It's marketing.
it's marketing,
Branding,
and wherever society goes, whatever the fad is, then you're going in that particular direction. And I think you used the word in the past, untethered, right? Who wants to be untethered?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think when the wind starts to blow, you want to be rooted in something. It's like a tree. You want to bend a little bit, but you're not going to fall over. And so I think it's important to know what those things are. Now, how do you advertise that? Should you advertise that? I don't know. I think you need to know as a leader what you're rooted in. The people who join your organization need to know what the organization is rooted in. And if we indeed are living those particular fundamental principles, it will come out in how you approach the marketplace. I don't think I ever enter a business and saying, I wonder what their religion is. No, I go in there and how do they treat me as a customer? What is their personality? How do they live up to their word? Is their advertisement equal to what I see in person? And so it's that consistency. But the consistency, I'd have to think, is rooted in some foundational elements. Otherwise, again, when I walk in there the second time, there'll be something completely different experience. We know, and you know this probably better than I do, about human nature and how we crave consistency. So whatever that rooted foundation is, just be consistent with it. And then let people decide whether or not they want to do business with you or not. But you shouldn't try to adjust your foundation to appease everyone. That makes absolutely no sense. We would say in business that one of the things that you should avoid is customizing your services, because when that's the case, you actually have no service. It's just being dictated by the client. And so in reality, you need to have a fundamental service that has a little bit of left, a little bit of right adjustment to it, but you still have to have a foundational service. Otherwise, whatever you are is whatever someone wants you to be. And to me, that's not rooted in anything.
What's not a leader?
There you go.
I mean, a leader certainly is adaptable, certainly is open. I think that there's a term that comes from the Bible that gets lost by religious people a lot, especially on the Christian side, the idea of love the person, hate the sin. And I think both sides now have decided if they have different beliefs, then they must dislike me.
Right. Yeah.
And that is... when I say both sides, that's probably universal across all humanity in the world, but it's a position that I think is ludicrous. I have several friends that aren't believers, several people that have different beliefs that I'm friends with, and that's fine.
Well,
but we know where we stand.
Is made up of others who perhaps believe differently. That's not a requirement to be part of the Rosewood family of companies. You just got to believe in our values fundamentally to be a good person, regardless of your religion.
Yeah, but I think it's both sides have lost how to care for a person, and certainly politics and the media and social media especially has pushed people further and further apart. We see the division of, in reality, most people have a definition of good that's pretty close. Now, whether they want to put it in the ground and base it on something, you start getting into more tension. But I would say that, for the most part, we need to know what you're pursuing and what I'm pursuing. As long as they're not directly in conflict, the values can coexist, then we have a great relationship, the basis of at least the start of a relationship, and we'll see how consistently each of us lives that out. But I think it's a thing we've lost potentially in business, and certainly have earned the leeriness by a lot of leaders doing it wrong, and we do it wrong. But again, that's why I think that if you go to Exodus, is just to bring in a religious reference, but it is, as far as I know, the first time a group of people in human history put out a set of values. In Exodus, when the Ten Commandments came out, they set out a way to judge even the king and themselves will be held to account on these values and these rules. And so I think that you can build a lot of rapport with people by being caring, showing that you care about the person despite whatever disbelief, they may have and whatever conflicts you may have. And we just lose that fairly often in today's world, and I think we need to get it back.
Yeah, I was just writing down here because you mentioned caring. And if we look across business interactions, I would think that most people, I won't say all, but most people want to interact with a company that is caring, that is respectful, that does see them as an individual, does value their opinion, does treat them in a way that is, I said respectful already, but treats them in a way that is welcoming. Okay, so the thing is, where do all those things come from, right? We would say it's part of human nature. Well, where does human nature come from? Where's the value systems? How were you brought up, right? And it's rooted in something. And so while all companies would want to display all of those traits, where are they rooted in? It has to be rooted in some foundational principles of being a good person or living a good life or running the race well, as you've said. And
the purpose of the entity, it doesn't always have to go all the way to the personal beliefs of the leader themselves, but the purpose of the the actual business itself. We've seen conscious capitalism companies that establish the environment and the lifestyle and the customer experience they want to operate around, and they build values they think that will create that environment and that purpose they're going for. And it does give them at least a way to your point, kind of reckon, am I in alignment with with the purpose, and am I in alignment with my values? And if not, how do I correct course and get back onto where I want to be?
Yeah, you're causing me to think now, because I was watching a podcast this weekend by a gentleman called Rory Vaden, and he was talking a lot about personal brand. And as you got deeper into this particular podcast or this webinar, it was how your personal brand has to blend into your personal why that blends into your business why. But so it was this alignment, because he says often what happens, it's incongruent. And so you've got a person leading the organization that isn't aligned with what the organization is standing for, or vice versa. They stand for something and the organization isn't doing what that person is. And so while I believe that the standards of the business, the purpose of the business can transcend or can live beyond the individual founder, I think it's the founder who actually establishes those initial qualities, that initial foundation, and others that continue to build upon it. And so I'm struggling to figure out how any founder can develop a business that isn't aligned with who they are and what they believe in. I don't know. Don't know how you could do that, because you could say, I really believe in X, but I'm going to build a business that believes in Y. How could you ever have enough consistency because of this conflict that you would have between what the business is about and what you are personally about?
Yeah, it's it's funny, because the number 4 reason ChatGPT thought it was important, despite not being willing to tell you it's important, great leaders integrate, not compartmentalize. So integration of their personal beliefs into how they lead.
Right.
And if you flip this around and have a discussion on just how do you interview, how do you pick a company you want to join, what organization are you going to spend that much time working with? And if you don't ask these questions of the leadership team at the business you're interviewing, again, it's marketing and branding. Is it just marketing and branding, or can they articulate not just their values, but why their values exist and what they're rooted in, that I think is important. Interesting, it struck me after the last, since we took religion, we'll go into politics now.
Excellent.
So we'll just do them all. But
Bring
they
it
had...
we're not afraid of anything here.
No. Well, they
podcast.
had, and it's an interesting, you talk about a just exercise in horrible leadership. Post-election, all the talk was opinion polls and focus groups, and that the message should have taken into account more of what the opinion polls and the focus groups. And I was thinking, isn't the point of putting multiple candidates up there is so that they can express their beliefs and their solutions and articulate it and let their party pick the person who represents those beliefs?
Correct.
Because they're actually a leader. And then that person runs for the general election. And every bit of the coverage that I've seen, even still today, keeps talking about how it was the wrong candidate and they didn't get the right message, and they weren't right on these issues. Are they leading or are they following? Because to me, the reason you have primaries and you have elections is that the population picks the leader who has a foundation and set of values that align with what they think is best for whatever election it is. And that's how we pick them. If every politician up there is just going to do a focus group and run polls and opinion polls, they don't stand for anything. So what are you actually electing? Like, you're electing the best chameleon, the best con artist? I don't know what we're doing, and this is universal to all politics. But to me, it's not at all different to a leader of a business and the business itself. It does not have a purpose. And again, it doesn't have to be rooted in the same thing I believe, but if it has no belief system and no purpose, whether that is, as far as greed or capitalism or whatever it is, at least I can evaluate what they're rooted in and then look at their values and see whether they're living those out and they're congruent in their attempts or not.
Right.
So
right.
It was just a observation I had that the reason that the leaders didn't win the election is that they didn't change their beliefs and their message based off of polls, as opposed to have some conviction and some actual values. And I thought that was a critique that amazed me.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I had that podcast I mentioned, listened to this weekend on the way in. I was listening to an audio book that I've read many times, but I continue to try to reinforce some of the information. And it was John Maxwell's book, Developing the Leader Within You 2.0. And in that book, and there's another book that he wrote called The 5 Levels of Leadership, he will talk about those 5 levels. And you talked about leadership, and you talked about, is a person leading or is this person following? And in the 5 levels, they'll talk about the first level of leadership is position, meaning you're a leader because you have the title. You're the president, you're the CEO, you're the manager, whatever. And so people are only following you because they have to, right? If they want a job, if they want a paycheck, they've got to do what you say. The second level of leadership is permission, where the individual chooses to follow you. And why are they choosing to follow you is probably based on some of these fundamental principles we just talked about. The third level of leadership is what they call production. People are choosing to follow you because of the results that you produce and what the team produces. So what you're providing to the organization. The fourth level is what we call the people development. They choose to follow you because of what you're doing for others, how you've helped others, how you've progressed others, how have you developed others, how have you supported others. And then finally is pinnacle, where people are choosing to follow you based purely off your reputation, about who you are. And so if we place that in the context of this political environment, well, why are you choosing to follow or not to follow the current president? Is it because you just don't like them? Okay, well, are you judging whether or not they are producing for the country? Are they producing? Are they developing others? Are they adding value? Or are you simply in an emotional state? It's a very interesting thing to decide, why do I choose to follow someone? And more importantly, is the focus group telling me who I should follow? Then at this point, it's not a choice. What you're doing is you're being manipulated to believe and to do one thing, when in reality, you're not exercising most fundamental freedom, which is the freedom of choice.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I mean, again, going back to this, and those who listen can certainly go chat GPT. I kind of ask it to start giving a little more questioning on their fundamental beliefs and their purpose. But, it says leaders face crisis, ambiguity, moral tension. What keeps the leader steady under pressure isn't usually strategy. It's their internal anchor being tethered, to your point. Without a solid worldview or belief system, so it doesn't have to be a religion, decisions can become reactive, utilitarian, and inconsistent. Jim Collins, who we like a lot at Rosewood and Helmwise, says in Good to Great, level 5 leaders is what it's called in their exhibit. It's a paradox. So it's a paradoxical blend of humility and fierce resolve. And so again, it's to me, you got to show caring for those that don't share your beliefs and don't share your
Yes.
direction. And you have to try to win them over, not force them over. Authoritarian is not what we advocate at all. And acceptance of other people with different beliefs is what we think is, the right way to do it. But that's also mixed with fierce resolve that you're going to run it in alignment with the values, and they must align to the values. They don't have to align to the underlying purpose, if that's a religious belief, whatever that is, but they do have to align to how they conduct their behavior and do business. And so, traits almost always are rooted in a deeper moral or spiritual foundation. And so I think it is odd that we would ask for leaders in business or in politics that will not state their values and why the values are important to them, why they aren't an ever-changing definition of the values, and instead are using the values to correct their own behavior in the direction that their business is going. Should be the other way around is really what I view it as. And so,
yeah, it's interesting. If you are looking to join an organization, what is it about the organization that is drawing you to it? Are you drawn by its marketing? Maybe. Are you drawn to its leader? Right? How often do individuals go into a company and actually research the company and find out truly what are their underlying values and foundations? And then maybe do some research and say, okay, over the history of the company, how often have they shown a consistency with those values? We've heard of all kinds of companies that shift in terms of how they execute in the marketplace based on who is the leader at any given time. And we also know, going back to Jim Collins, that in Built to Last, he talks about these legacy companies that have been around for more than 100 years. And what fuels their longevity is this consistency with the foundations at which it was built upon, and how those can transcend generations, right? And if it's built on some fundamental principles, they were just as applicable, let's say, in the 1800s as they are now in the 2000s, because they were built on some fundamental principles, perhaps dating back to some ethos that was rooted in some religion, most likely some place at some time. And so that is what happens. But as a person looking to join a company, I don't think very many, and I could be wrong, but I can only use my own experience. I don't think I ever went into depth about what is the company about. Coming to Rosewood was probably the first time I did that. As you mentioned, I've been in a lot of big enterprises. Well, why was in big enterprises? Was I drawn to the corporate name, right? Want to be associated with it, going back to want to be part of the clan or the tribe. But when I made the choice to move from Northern Virginia here to North Carolina, it was very deliberate. This was the time where I came down and said, wait a minute, I'm looking for the company that kind of matches who I am. Not just because I can, wear their logo, but really, does it represent who I am? Because that's an easier thing to stay aligned with. That's an easier thing to be motivated towards. And if there's alignment with that purpose and those values, then I think your chances of success are far greater because you are aligned.
Yeah, I think that, Good to Great shows that this discussion is very relevant to business. The great companies do build a framework around how they operate and what their purpose is. It doesn't make them not nimble. There's a big push that, name it, whether it's religion or it is some other constraint system you built around based off of your purpose, whatever you established, that's restraining. And I think that's the wrong way to look at it. I think it's more of, let's look at your diet if you're an athlete, workout regimen. Those things are actually there to propel you further.
Correct.
Than you would go otherwise. And so I think what you see in the businesses, they respond, not react, as you say, to market needs and the unpredictability of life. but they respond within a manner that is in alignment with their values, and their people can rally around, which is why they would stick around, is, you know what, no matter what comes our way, we're going to try to do it the right way.
There you go.
And so I don't think it's irrelevant to business. If you look over some of the biggest studies out there, the businesses that have that, do well. As the employee, certainly you come on to there's nothing wrong with need to make money and start your career and jump and go to other places.
But understand that's what you're doing at that season.
And I still would argue that a business properly aligned the values understands that you need to move on in your career or the position's not good for you, and they don't, hold people back. I think that when they are restraining, there is a problem. When they help you flourish and push you forward,
Correct.
then that's the proper way to have it. And so I think that's one way when you go into one of these businesses and they say, oh, we got great values, and they tell you exactly what it's rooted in. I think my next question would be, how do those propel us forward and make us better employees and a better company so we have more opportunity? Or do you view them as restrictive? And that's where you get into kind of coming down on people that don't have the same beliefs. They don't have, it's a weapon and not a propellant for success and flourishing.
I find it fuel, right? Because it's aligned with who I am, and therefore it's easier. It's easier to row when we're going in the same direction. And if the company was not completely, let's say it was off from my personal value system, then that's going to cause tension over time. It goes back to working genius. You may be skilled at a lot of things, but if you're doing certain things that are not aligned with your geniuses over time, it drains you. And that's what I would see. You would get stressed over time. And I think it takes a lot of self-awareness to understand why you're being stressed over time. So let's say you came here and you enjoyed the company for the first 3 years, and then years 4, years 5, you're starting really, it's just not as exciting anymore. The question is why? Has the company changed? Maybe, maybe not. Have you changed? Maybe, maybe not. Or is it just this consistent misalignment that over time has drawn the energy away from you? And so to me, I find an organization that is more aligned, and probably perfect is not the way. We mentioned before, it's not going to be absolutely perfect, but let's say more aligned, I find it more of a propellant rather than something that I don't find it restrictive at all. I find it easy and natural to move forward with the organization.
Yeah, so after you kind of question whether their system causes flourishing, propellant, fuel, whatever you want to call it, if it makes your career accelerate, how's it good for you and the business and the longevity in the market? You got to ask them point blank, what happens when you're out of alignment as the leader, as the organization, and how they respond? Because we've worked with companies from Fortune 50 to small businesses, and when you see that everyone recognizes they're out of alignment with their own values, but no one speaks up,
Yes.
And no one pivots. They don't have the humility part that blends in with the fierce resolve to say, I've gotten off course. And again, we say there's a difference in a stone thrower and a stone mason.
I wrote that down earlier.
So are you bringing up where they're falling short of their values and their purpose in order to make the organization get back in alignment with their leadership team, or are you just throwing rocks? That's certainly one thing. But if they need to be able to answer to me, tell me what happens, Scott, when someone calls you out on failure to live up to your own stated value system, or the fact that you came to an organization to align yourself with the values they have on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
How do you respond? And I think that's a kind of another area. If you hear this podcast, you think, well, this is a pipe dream, or it's going to create some cult, which is what they try to say. But the question of the cult is, all right, well, again, are you helping people flourish? Are you giving them the ability to grow themselves? How are you handling when it's not in alignment with your stated beliefs? If they can't answer those things, there's two options. One, it's probably going to be a little bit of a restrictive environment, or two, it's all smoke and mirrors because it sounded good and they read it out of some business books and some theology books potentially, or some belief system they have.
Yeah, I think, and I've definitely seen this here at the Rosewood family of companies. Again, one of the reasons I sought out to come down here is the environment is healthy. What I mean by healthy is we will have conflict, right? We will challenge one another, right? And is it in the fact that are we living the values? We've had discussions during the Rosewood executive team. Well, we'll say, wait a minute, we're doing X. Is X aligned with our values? And we use that as part of our decision-making criteria. I think if earlier in my career, if someone were to challenge me and say, you're not living the values or you're not leading in the appropriate way, I probably would become defensive. I think over time, maybe it's through maturity, maybe it's through being in the proper environment where you appreciate the fact that you're being challenged. You're like, wow, you're right. You're right. It's a little bit of humility. We mentioned how important that is to be a captain, is to have humility. And you've got to be comfortable in the fact that, first of all, you're not perfect, and you want others to challenge you because we want to challenge one another to stay consistent with that value system, with those foundations. And so I've also said as part of the cohort curriculum, when we talk about culture, you know you have a good culture when people are willing to defend the culture. When they're willing to say, wait a minute, you are not acting in accordance with our culture, our values, and are willing to stand up and challenge. If they're not, if they're willing to turn away, they're willing to allow that, to tolerate that, then really how committed are you to the culture or to the values? So I would say in my earlier career, I would have been defensive. I would say now, which is much more enjoyable, I enjoy people holding me accountable because I want to be held accountable because I do get off track. And I want people to let me know when I'm 1 foot or 2 feet off the track, not when I'm a mile off.
Yeah, it stings.
Sure it does.
Certainly it stings.
It's part of learning, though.
You know, we get exit interviews here, and we see where we have not lived up to our values potentially. I take exit interviews. I look for the positives I can get out of them. Usually there's a reason that the exit occurred, so it's not always the most reliable source of, you'd rather have someone who is committed to fixing the situation, but it may be an exit that the company chose. And either way, there's good data in it to do some self-reflection. But if you just take it to, what does it mean to be coachable? I mean, that's really what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Are you going to be coachable in your personal leadership? Or are you going to be coachable as an organization? And certainly through sports, and you obviously trained a lot of pilots and trained people. If they're not confident enough but humble enough to take correction and think that they can always do better, even if they're doing a great job, then they've hit a ceiling, and they're probably going to, either flame out or, in your past life, crash and die. I mean, it's just not it's a dangerous thing for a leadership team. It's a dangerous thing for a business not to ask for some healthy conflict and feedback and self-correction.
Well, I also think it's unrealistic to think that you're going to be in an organization and there isn't going to be a time when you're in conflict. I mean, that's just not how life works. Think of any relationship, right? Yes, you're going to have an argument every now and then. You're going to see things differently every now and then. But usually the resolution comes from you having that discussion and then working out those differences. Same thing should happen inside of an organization, right? You wouldn't want to not be challenged, because if you're not being challenged, then you're not growing. And then also we talked about balance versus harmony, right? Yes, we want to work in harmony, but sometimes it gets disharmonious for a period of time. And it may be for a season, but if you can't communicate, if you can't have an open conversation, if you can't be authentic, then I think it's just a recipe for disaster over time.
Very good. Well, I do again want to be clear that, I think organizations that have different purposes but have strong values operate really well together. Different reasons for their beliefs. You think if they were wanting to build the best car possible at the best price, well, okay, well, what does that look like in values?
Right.
How do we achieve it? Like, what are the behaviors? So you lay out the values, but even deeper, why do you think that it's good to give people the best car possible as opposed to the cheapest car you can build at the highest price they'll pay so you can make the most profit? Those are two different things. And I think that will be much more rewarded, and I think society functions better if you challenge a little bit. Like, hey, that's a good set of values and I don't mind the purpose at all. Tell me why that purpose is actually personally convicting to you, because if it's not, that will warp and twist as you move through the organization or as its life cycle goes on. And again, I think Collins and some of the more long view, macro, almost metadata analysis of businesses reflect which ones bubble to the top that are pretty well defined in why they think it's, provide transportation for all of humanity so that they can be mobile and get to store. Like, that's pretty noble.
Right.
How do you live that out? And so, again, could be completely different belief systems, but it needs to be rooted in something that they're willing to put out there and be held accountable to their purpose.
Yes.
And it needs to create values that they're willing to be held accountable to. Otherwise, it's a chameleon to me, and it's a situation that you just need to be aware of. So.
Well, comes back to awareness, right? And that's key. And what I welcome and what I really enjoy is the fact that we have differing viewpoints and differing opinions, and we can have a discussion like this. There are many podcasts out there that wouldn't discuss this topic, but for us, it's important. And I'm sure there are probably listeners out there who have different views than we do, and we'd welcome those views as well, because it causes us to learn and see things from different perspectives. But it's always an environment of learning and understanding. Covey would say, seek first to understand, then to be understood. So, okay, I'm open. I'm willing to learn. We talked about being coachable, being teachable, willing to see things from different perspectives. That's the only way in which we can continue to grow. I just did it naturally, putting your hands up, going, help me. If I'm seeing things differently, let me know. I will never see things differently than I currently do unless someone challenges me to do exactly that. And that's what I welcome and enjoy here at the Rosewood family of companies.
Very good.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining the Powerhouse Perspective. Join us next month for a new episode. In the meantime, cheers.
Take care.